I met William Treuniet about 2012, 13. He came to Australia. So William studied psychology and physics and also worked with communication technology with the Canadian government for quite some time in his career. So when he retired, it actually seemed to have helped him a lot to then do all the 5 years investigation of the Zeta information. So he worked with Paul and Cyan up there on the top. He worked with Paul, and Paul is a trance medium down in Townsville, up in Townsville. And so at the beginning, when I met Paul, we would talk to the Zetas, and it would be very much about their social structure. You know, how do you live? How long do you live? What do you eat? How do you make babies? And all this normal stuff. And then when William came in and he started the interviews, it was more about the greater picture. And it was about propulsion technology, and it was about craft, and it was about so many things I had to read many times to understand. Now I'm a bit better with it. And so then William and Paul had created the primer of the Zeta rays, which then obviously my questions were endless. So William was so kind and then we write it as a quick Zeta primer with Paul. So it is a little bit more condensed and has many more normal words I can get. And so, Paul and William were in Malaysia quite a few times. And we had some great experiences with craft, with a dome, healing. So I know William will talk about the whole cosmology, but I hope we have a bit of time at the end to actually look at experiences he had with the Zetas, because I think a lot of people do remember in the end always when it was talked about experience, how it affected people and how they saw it and the outcomes. So hopefully we have a little bit of time at the end to go a little bit into that. And what I find interesting at the moment, it comes to me from all sides that this cosmology the Zetas propose about that really all is not just conscious, all is consciousness and all possibilities exist and all that. And it comes from different communicators now. They all seem to try to get humanity to a greater understanding so we actually can move forward and not be, you know, stuck in the old ways. Off you go, William.
I want to talk about a little bit about what happened beforehand, before I met Paul, and it might be of interest to you. And first of all, I'd like to go way back when I was a child, or when I was being raised by my parents, and we were exposed to the concept of heaven. And I always wondered at the time what it was and where it was. And nobody had a satisfactory answer. It's somewhere up there, and it's a nice place. There's streets of gold, that kind of thing. And well, since then I've got a better idea about how it all fits together, and that's what I want to talk about here. There are books about other realms that I think are very interesting to read. The most interesting one to me and to a lot of other people, I think, is the book by Jürgen Zeta called Multidimensional Man. And there are several other books that were worth a mention. Cyrus Kirkpatrick has an Understanding Life After Death. And then William Bowman, of course, has Adventures Beyond the Body. Eben Alexander has Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife. And then there's Mindsight, Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind from Birth by Kenneth Ring and Sharon Cooper. And finally, Pim van Lommel wrote Consciousness Beyond the Life, the Science of the Near-Death Experience, and he's a cardiac surgeon, so he's had a lot of exposure to people dying. Now, these are not, of course, not the only books, but they're the ones that I would put near the front of the list about other realms, besides perhaps not heaven, but a similar idea. And these realms, in these books, there's some attempts to describe what they're like. And these are experienced by people who have had a near-death experience or out-of-body experience. And for one thing, the sensations that they report are said to be realer than real sometimes. And so it's not just a vague memory. And the physical sensations that they experience imply that there is matter there. And just like we are accustomed to matter here. And they do strange things like fly or move at the speed of thought, so they can switch scenes very quickly. And they have the ability to create, to modify their environment. And I think Jürgen actually talks about this in his book, about what is more effective at making things appear, a thought form, I suppose. And he says that the externalized expectations, without really thinking about it, work better than having the intention to create. You can't. It's better to just go along and have things happen the way you're accustomed to, or more accustomed to, instead of intending to change things. And in general, attitudes and your feelings are often externalized in the environment. And Jürgen also mentions that that people there can change their appearance. His mother, he ran into at one point and didn't recognize her physically, her appearance. But as he got close to her, he recognized that it was her from her energy. So there is a constant associated with the person, but the looks of the person can change. And there also seems to be an impression that oral and visual sensations are like surround sound. There's this 360-degree perception of what's happening around you. And yeah. So all these things that I talked about, I've never actually experienced myself. I'm rather normal, or more like everybody else when it comes to having these kinds of experiences. What would you call them? Unusual experiences. And so I hope to bring in a kind of an intellectual understanding of this kind of reality rather than report firsthand experiences. And this is useful, I think, because our present scientific establishment is really missing out on something, and they need to be brought to see that there is that things are really quite different from what they expect or what they think. Okay, around 2007, I retired in 2005 from my career work. And in 2007, I began to really look at the unidentified flying object phenomenon, or UFO. And the way my approach was to look at photographs that other people have taken. The photographs are generally considered suspect because some of them are easy, or a lot of them are easy for people to hoax. So some people get a kick out of that, creating images that fool people. And but I found a feature of these photographs that are unlikely to be hoaxed. And the feature in particular is in many of these photographs, the object was accompanied by a donut-shaped, transparent object that is usually located next to or very close to the so-called UFO. And this is relevant because it came up later with my work with the Zetas. And my first exposure to physical mediumship occurred in a retreat in Marbella, Spain in 2012. Kai Meg was putting on a seance there. And I was sort of open-minded at the time. I thought, well, this might be real or it might not be. And the experience with Kai was rather definitive for me. First of all, there was a table levitation. I couldn't see how. I looked carefully to see if people were actually lifting the table. And I couldn't see how they could be doing that. And it only worked when Kai was standing, next to the table. And there was also distant spirit lights in the room, in the seance. These little lights are mainly for entertainment, I think. But for me, I couldn't really see how the medium could be producing or causing that kind of movement. And we're well out of reach of the medium. And so I decided at that point that this is for real, that there's something going on here that our scientific establishment couldn't explain. I should probably pursue this. At the same retreat, Robin Foy was there. He's the person who reported on the skull experiment in a book called Witnessing the Impossible. And this was a very good book for me because it was basically a diary of every session that they had over the 5 years. And I did an analysis of that book, and I was interested in understanding the physical phenomena and the social dynamics that seemed to work during the seances. Wrote up the analysis, and it can be found if people are interested in a book, a recent book that I've authored called Signs of a Multidimensional Reality. And it's chapter 22 if you're interested. And anyway, this analysis made me what I would consider an instant expert on physical mediumship phenomena. I knew from that pretty much what could happen. At the same retreat, there was a trance workshop. We were encouraged to meditate and try to go into a trance, I suppose, and then report afterwards what we had experienced. And I remember there was a man there with a heavy Dutch accent who was still in trance when it was his turn to report. And amazingly enough, the voice that came out of his mouth had a distinct American accent. There was no hint of a Dutch accent. So it certainly seemed as if someone else was speaking out of his mouth. And when it came to my turn, I said, I didn't see much. I saw a deer off in the distance in a nice green forest, and it was standing there looking back at me. This kind of thing, apparently, or I know, is reported often by people who contact extraterrestrial beings, and they're called screen memories. So the deer that I saw was somehow or other, or could have been implanted in my mind at the time. And this was picked up on by another person in the workshop, and he recognized it as possibly an ET screen memory. And so he suggested I contact Paul Hamden, who we knew was an ET channel, or someone who the ET. I took this suggestion seriously, and when I returned home, I contacted Paul, and he and I hit it off very well. And it was almost as if we're picking up from where we left off, and that that the relationship between us was expected somehow. He familiarized me with his experiences, and I guess he saw a possibility that we would author or a book together about his experiences. And I thought about it for a while, and I thought, yeah, okay, that should be very interesting. And so I agreed to do it with him. The first time I talked to the Zetas was remotely online using, I think it was Skype. Before the night before the interview that I had with him, I was told later that what had awakened me was some kind of preparation that was made to me somehow in preparation for the conversation, the interaction. And what I felt was I guess about 3 o'clock in the morning, was a whole body, a very strong vibration of the whole body. But it only lasted about a second, but it was certainly sufficient to wake me up and wonder what was going on. And later on, they told me that this was something that they had done to prepare me for the conversation with the Zetas. The online conversations began in 2012, in the spring of 2012, and continued a few times until 2013 and 2014, when I went to Australia to participate in a number of seances there that Inga was hosting at her place. And then after that was over, we continued the interviews remotely again until about 2019. So it was for several years that we did this. And I kept adding chapters to the book and releasing. We released it after every so often, until finally the book, as it now stands, is at edition 16. So there were a number of times that we added to the book, and whenever we had more conversations and found more interesting things to talk about. We ended up with several books. One was that Inga mentioned, The Primer of the Zeta Race, and it's quite a big book, and it covers a lot of topics, like as she said, about the Zeta race. We talked about materialization, the process of creation, incarnation, including the incarnation of hybrid consciousness, which is an ET consciousness combined with a spirit realm consciousness in the same body. And apparently there are 30% of humanity is of that nature. So look beside you, probably somebody there would be a hybrid consciousness. And we talked about spirit realm, the characteristics of it. We talked about healing. We talked about a concept called heterodyning, which I will explain more later. There's a second book, Extraterrestrial Cosmology and Technology, which I sort of wrote on my own initiative, because it covers mostly the new physics that, you could call it that. It merges the line between smudges the line between science and religion, you might say, or science and matters of faith. They both can be seen as different aspects of the same phenomenon. I will show you that's the case when we talk about the cosmology. And there's also a journal article that was published called "The Cosmology Founded on Intrinsic Attributes of Consciousness," which I was surprised to be able to get to that the editor would allow that to be published, because I was fairly explicit, even quoted the Zetas. And so here's a journal article that has a lot of input from extraterrestrial beings, and yet it was published. So kudos to the editor for that. All these books and articles are free downloads on my website, which is probably a better way for us to communicate what that is. Now, the Zetas expected us to not sit on this information, but to pass it along. Also, why are they talking to us was their question. And so this is what I'm doing, is trying to satisfy that request that more and more people should know about this cosmology and the existence of the extraterrestrial beings. And also, this is, to me, this was a bit of an academic exercise that I was accustomed to, and I was never ever paid for that kind of work in the past. So why should I start now? And so the book was really, you can consider it an academic exercise where I try to be as truthful and factual as possible. We can move into now the presentation of the cosmology. And first of all, there's a limitation of scientific materialism that should be mentioned. And that is, there may be several, but the one that the most glaring one for me is the fact that sensations are basically ignored. You know, we all have sensations, but scientifically, the color, a particular color is referred to by its wavelength and intensity, and not by the actual experience of the sense of the color. And scientists tend to ignore this as the experience as irrelevant. They call it an epiphenomenon, which basically means you can ignore it. Now, matter and sensation, the difference between them was emphasized by Bernardo Kastrup in his book, The Idea of the World. It's fairly recent. And he's showed that the two, the matter and sensation, are different levels of abstraction. You can't say that they're the same thing. One precedes the other. And sensation, of course, would precede the experience that there is matter around us. So the matter is inferred from the sensations that are in consciousness. And so everything that happens to it in the perception of matter happens in consciousness. So there's no need to posit that there is some external entity like matter separate from our personal consciousness, you might say. And I find it kind of ironic that scientists take this point of view, because most of their data is collected using their senses, and yet they don't see that worthy of study, and maybe because they can't. And that might be the whole reason. It's much easier to talk about phenomena we can measure than the actual experience themselves. Okay, the ETs left us with a cosmology. And philosophers refer to that cosmology as something called ontological idealism. And what this means is that we live in a mental universe. Everything we experience happens in our minds. And the fact that we see physical objects out there is an illusion. We recognize that there are physical objects, but they're actually constructed in our minds. And this is a kind of a new thing, or not. It's certainly not acceptable to the scientific community, although it's starting to become more talked about. And there are several people who have theories. And what I want to do is talk about the Zeta cosmology. And I think it's more complete than what other people have proposed. And I would like to tell you a bit more about it. And it has in the publications that I put out so far, I've just written that consciousness has a number of attributes, and up to 10, as a matter of fact. And these are would be hard to work out for humans without help from somebody like the Zetas. And so I think it's worthwhile for me to to make this known. There are these 10 attributes I divided up into 3 groups of 3. In the first group, there is something, I'm not sure if I want to bore people with all the details of these 3. So I'll just mention what they are, and then the publications that I mentioned have actually provide the whole list. So you could look there if you're interested. But in a more general sense, the consciousness has what they call existence, it has wholeness, and it has malleability, which means that it's configurable. And of course, we know that because we have thoughts in consciousness, and our thoughts change. So it's malleable in that respect. It has features like vibration, which is an important concept. And I find that other theories of based on idealism tend to not include that. And I think that's critical that it should be included, because without vibration, there's a lot of things we can't explain. Because it has vibration, there is also the idea of resonance, that some vibrations are more compatible with each other than others. And so you can distinguish between resonance and dissonance. There are things in consciousness called potentials. And a potential is the possibility that something will be instantiated or something will happen. An example of a potential is just a sensation. A particular sensation would activate or instantiate a particular potential. And so we would then experience that sensation. And so a potential is the sensation. Then we have 3 different processes in consciousness that enable it to experience new things. And one of them is a creation, the ability to create. And the other is the ability to perceive what has been created. And then there's also an intention that can appear in consciousness. An intention is to place a belief structure in thought that something will change, is the way they put it. So, and then there's another concept or configuration in consciousness, which may or may not be fundamental. I think it is in our physical experience, and that is something they call the grid. There is a grid in consciousness that is instantiated whenever there is a creation created. Whenever something is created, it is created in a grid. And this is a concept in consciousness. It's not a physical phenomenon. So now I want to talk about some of these ideas, or some of these attributes. And the first one is that vibration is multidimensional. The multidimensionality of vibration is a very important idea. I modeled it as a kind of a matrix structure, and I'll show you that later. But first of all, the first thing to note is that vibration has an ordinal scale. I don't know if you know what an ordinal scale is. It means that at a particular level of vibration is either greater, the same as, or less than another level of vibration. And there is no metric to distinguish between them. So you can't really measure the distance between one level of vibration or another. They're just higher or lower, or the same. It's not like a rational number like frequency is. And the Zetas used the concept of frequency to begin with. And I recognize that could not possibly be, because time is not considered to be fundamental to consciousness. Time is a creation that people invent when the need arises, I guess. We use time because it makes life a lot easier for us for some reason. And what the Zeta is meant by frequency, they say, is the level of consciousness that an entity holds. And so as you move from one frequency to the other, your consciousness is placed in an expected state. So basically they're saying it's either higher or lower or the same of another frequency or another vibration or frequency. Yeah. Okay, vibration can be sensed in the now. Think of putting a finger on a door buzzer. When somebody presses the button, you'll feel a particular vibration, and you don't need to know a number associated with that vibration. You just feel it, and I think that's the way the vibrations of consciousness works. You feel the level of vibration, and you don't measure it. So there were two basic. No, that's wrong. There are more than two dimensions of frequency that we use. One of them would be a vibrational dimension that defines the functions of our body. For example, every organ system is defined in terms of vibration. Since consciousness is fundamental to all, then your body parts has to be defined in terms of that. Okay, now this is a graphic of the model that I came up with for vibration. And I show three dimensions on this model, the I, J, and K axes. And one important dimension is the physical type of vibration dimension. And where you are along that axis is sort of identifies what realm you are in. The three realms that we know a bit about anyway, are the etheric realm, the astral realm, and the spirit realm. And on the J axis, there is what I call the harmony axis, and it's an axis that represents how loving a person is. And so you can see that the graphic represents, or the bars in the graphic represent a person in a particular realm having achieved a certain state of harmony. And so that's all that's really required for the human race. And then there are other axes as well, some of which are in the physical plane and some are not. Okay. Then there are processes that I cannot describe to you now because of the limited time. But one thing I like to talk about, though, is our realms. Realms are creations too. And those three realms you see there, the etheric, astral, and spirit realms, they were created. And the Zetas and also the Anunnaki who came through Paul occasionally explained to us that the astral and the spirit realms were created because humans were seen to be developing a spirit consciousness that needed a place to stay, needed a place to go after they leave this realm. And so they chose the spirit realm or gave it the infrastructure or the mechanisms to allow people to come back to a physical existence in our realm. So there are other processes that I could talk about. One is the heterodyny process, which is useful for transferring information across the realm boundaries. And there again, I believe that. I have some examples of how that could be used. And there are practical uses of the cosmology. One I mentioned already, the idea of sensations, how that can be represented. There, the idea of near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. These happen when a consciousness can move from one state of vibration to another. And there are things like telepathy and remote viewing and so on that can be understood as a creation of objects at a distance. I also have had a discussion intended for about apports, which are objects that appear out of thin air, basically. And spirits are often given the credit for doing this, but the Zeta suggested that they have help. There are other entities out there, perhaps themselves, that offer some support for creating apports. And with respect to the unidentified flying objects, or the craft of the ETs, they also dematerialize in a similar way to that the apport appears. They can shift the craft to another vibrational state, so that it actually no longer exists in our space, and so they disappear. And yet they don't cease to exist; they exist and continue to exist in another vibrational level. So many magical observations involve shifts on the physical type of vibration dimension, like that. And also like to note that a being in the astral or spirit realm does not need to have a great amount of love. We might think of spirit beings as being loving and so on, but some are and some aren't, because the physical type of vibration is independent of the harmony dimension. And so you can have physical types of various kinds having various levels of harmony. And I can stop there if you like. There are some URLs that I could give you to direct you to further literature.
Thank you, William.
Yeah, very interesting. I'd like to know if this ability of them to shift vibration, does that enable them to beat the speed of light barrier?
I would say yes, because light itself, well, I'll tell you that we never actually discussed that. Okay, I'm just speaking off the top of my head. The light barrier, or I think light propagates using the vibrations of consciousness as the medium. And this is a new idea, and I base it on a lot of things that the Zetas have said, although they never explicitly said that. But I think that they probably would agree. And the transition from one vibrational state to another is probably instantaneous when you know how to do it. And so I say then that it's probably faster than light, or it would happen faster than I'm not sure how you would compare light to that kind of operation, though, because light is propagated in our realm. It goes different places than transitioning to another vibrational level. It's not the same thing, it's hard to compare the two, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
But that all relates to how much of the universe they can really experience, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, the universe is a lot bigger than, well, our universe is usually thought to be all-encompassing, right? But it turns out that it's not. I mean, our universe is really something that exists in the etheric realm. And there are plenty of other existences and other vibrations.
I would like to, William, can you talk about the healings of the Zeta rays they are creating in our reality? How that was as an experience?
Well, I can talk about my own healing.
Yeah, I just think it'd be nice to get, it's not all, you know, the Zetas are not like something out there. They're actually really interacting with our side. And they're teaching us, but they're all showing us. Would you mind?
Well, I can. I once had what some people might consider a trivial problem, but it was important to me. I had a lesion on my nose that the doctors call actinic keratosis, and it's kind of a precancerous condition, and it could get a lot worse. And I couldn't get it to go away, or a dermatologist couldn't heal it, and that kind of thing. So I asked Paul if the Zetas could take care of it. And one night I was here in Canada and they were in Australia, and I recorded the conversation, and they decided at one point during the session to do the healing, and it took about an hour and a half, a minute and a half to accomplish that. And then they told us what they did, and it's the entire conversation is documented, but basically what they did, and this is only perhaps one method of healing that they have. I'm not saying it's the way they do all healings, but what they did at that time was they saw the problem I had as something that the body was accepting and not trying to deal with. And so what they did was they created the conditions that apply when the body is injured. And so when those conditions were created, my own consciousness, my local consciousness took over and did the healing as normal, as it normally does. This is the self-healing process, which I didn't have time to talk about. And so half an hour after the session, I took another picture, and there was already a change that I could see. And the next day or two, there was scar tissue forming, and a week later, it was completely healed. So this happened very quickly, and after quite a period of time when nothing was changing, or it was getting worse, if anything. So that was my experience with the healing with Zetas.
And Jeannie's ear? I love that story.
Yeah. That was pretty good. Jean had a case of, what do you call it, when the inner ear ceases to function. I forget the name of it. But anyway, she
couldn't hear.
She couldn't hear, and she couldn't hear all her life in that ear. So it was pretty much dead. Well, except for the lowest frequencies. She could hear some lower frequencies. But she couldn't hear. It was useless for understanding speech and so on. So Paul took her. This was in Australia, in your place. Paul took her into a room that he used for that purpose, and laid her on a couch. Told her not to try to meditate or anything like that. In other words, just be still. And he reported later that there were a couple of spirits there who were working with a new technology, and there was also a number of people there with blue skins, so he considered them to be non-human. So there were probably non-human entities in the room with them. And they were mostly onlookers, though. So, but what they did to her was provide an etheric ear, and this ear was connected directly to her auditory system in her brain. It bypassed the ear mechanism itself. And when we got home, I used some software, do-it-yourself kind of software that I had created while I was working, and I used that to measure the state of her hearing in that side. And I knew that the ear was outside the head, and I was able to determine that it was not stationary, so that sometimes she heard best when I spoke back here, then when up here, I tried to say the word the same way, and she would sort of indicate which was more easiest to hear for her to hear, either the front or the back. And I saw that the position of best hearing shifted from the front to the back. And so that's a nice confirmation to me anyway, that what he had reported was true, that the etheric ear was floating outside her head and it could move. And so then I took some do-it-yourself software and had her measure it allowed her to move pointers on the screen so that and adjust the volume of the sound and so on. And she was able to show me how well her hearing was for that particular day. And I found that for the ear that was supposedly dead in those frequency ranges, that she was now able to detect sound at say a 60 decibel level, whereas before the audiologist had said, well, she can't hear anything up to 110 or 120 dB, right? So there was a very significant improvement in her ability to hear, and it was noticeable to her when she and I were walking outside. There was nothing to reflect the sound. She was still able to hear me when I was walking on her opposite side, right? So she said that she could still tell that I was speaking there. So it gave her a small degree of improvement in her quality of life, but it really wasn't enough, right? And I'm still waiting for a request is in to the Zetas to try to up the gain on this ear so that she can have more use of it. So we'll see how that works out. But it was quite remarkable anyway that they were able to improve it any amount. You know, this is unusual.
I remember an ear story. I don't know if you were there. There was a deaf lady in a sitting. And so when the sitting started, the lady goes, "Can you speak up? I really can't hear you. I really can't hear you." And then the communicator goes, "Oh, we can fix that." And suddenly she goes, "Oh my God, I can hear really, really, really clear." And so she was very excited, and the whole sitting went. And then at the end of the sitting, she walked out and I said something to her. And she goes, "I can't hear you again." And so the next time when we ask, I go, "Oh my God, you fixed the hearing. And why can't she hear now?" And they go, "Well, she didn't ask for keeping it that way. We just did it so
really?
she could hear us." I thought it was hilarious. But there's so many really good stories. So many good stories.
Yeah.
But maybe Paul next week has to go into some exciting. Paul, do you want to say something to that, please?
Good day, everybody. So with Jeannie's etheric ear, the Zetas are looking into that. I mean, obviously, there's technical aspects to working with etheric technology. So that's the first thing. With the lady in the sitting, she had continually said that she didn't have new hearing aids. The Zetas knew that she did. And after about 5 minutes of her denying that she had new hearing aids, she actually remembered that she actually did have new hearing aids in. And so they were able to change the operation of those hearing aids as well. The thing I want to say about the Zetas is they are very, very active in working with humans, and that's very good. They don't just make pronouncements. They actually work with humans, and they have given at least 300 to 500 people healing, and a lot of it's been very significant healings as well. They also have, as William has done a fantastic job with the books, given a lot of information to humanity in regards to that. And a lot of the things that they've said now are coming to pass in regards to disclosure. So that's the sort of thing I'll be talking about next week.
William, I think what's really important, what you have done, is to take Paul's work and the Zetas and make it academically respectable. I mean, what you have done is shown that there is a science behind what Paul is doing, and that this is not just something that is delusional or fantasy or part of the unconscious mind. And I think your contribution has been absolutely fabulous in that regard. Anybody who is serious about UFOs, who is serious about cosmology, has got the books are all there. And I know it's frustrating for you trying to explain to people in sort of 20 minutes something that's taken you 7 years to work on. But I'm hoping that you will be prepared to reply to anybody who wants to email you on your website. I've put the details of your website there. The books are all there. You have very generously made them free of charge to anybody who is serious about this research. How has this changed your life, your contact with the Zetas?
Well, in retrospect, I think my whole life was sort of preparing me for this very thing. So, you know, I've had a lot of guidance and a lot of help, perhaps, in reaching this point. I don't think I did it all myself, and I don't think Paul and I did it ourselves. But there are other influences in our lives that brought us to this point. And yeah, I would say if it hadn't happened, that something would have been incomplete. You know, that this is necessary. This had to happen because this is the reason why I'm here. Basically, you know, we all think we have a purpose. Well, that was my purpose.
Fantastic. Do you feel that you have ongoing contact with the Zetas?
No, I don't anymore. And I sometimes complain about that, perhaps without, you know, maybe I shouldn't be, because I got so much more from them than I have to complain about. And Paul, I want you to know that. And I may complain once in a while that they no longer contact me, or I don't feel them around me anymore. And, you know, I felt a lot of that while I was writing the books, you know, for the 5 or 6 years when I was writing the books. And they were certainly there looking over my shoulder, you know, helping me. A lot of things, a lot of those chapters just poured out of me. You know, they didn't take long to along with their help, of course, because I had the interviews, the transcripts of the interviews to go by, and so I just made those into a more readable format, perhaps, or more understandable by you and I. But their use of language was also very good. I mean, I have no complaints in that regard, and I can tell the difference between Paul speaking and them speaking. You know, they're not. It definitely wasn't Paul speaking to me with all this stuff.
They have much more knowledge than Paul.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to document.
William, thanks very much indeed. Just a question: when you said after the slide 1 that the spirit realm was created for the human spirit to somewhere to go. So what happened? What happened before that realm was created? Which leads to the question: is when did the Zetas actually first come to Earth, or into this reality or realm, or whatever you want to call it?
Okay, well, the Zetas were not involved in this. It was, as I mentioned, it was the Anunnaki. This was a different race that also comes to speak through Paul, but they're pretty consistent with whatever the Zetas say. And so I have no complaints in that regard. They were apparently here on Earth around 200,000 years ago. And they did do some of the things that people attribute to them, like do a little genetic engineering on the hominids around at the time, hunter-gatherers.
That's the Anunnaki, isn't it? That's the Anunnaki that did that, yeah?
Yeah. It was the Anunnaki that did that. And so they said that they created the astral and the spirit realms because it was needed. They waited, I guess they waited until they saw that humanity had no place to go when they died. And there was a spirit being released, or a consciousness, and they needed that. So I guess they did it out of necessity.
Oh, 1 second. Do you think they needed that for people being in, having this experience? And like we say, people's spirit, sometimes when they pass, they a bit confused in it all. Do you think it would be created as an area for adjusting to be an energetic being?
Can
Could
I
that
answer this
be?
one, William? Can I answer this one just for a second?
Oh,
Sure.
sorry, yeah.
So, okay, so before humans existed, we need to think about this. Humans have
Okay.
never existed, yeah? And, at that point, there are other races. And so then some beings decide to populate this physical planet, and they do, and that's the Anunnaki. Now, of course, there are other beings that have used this as an experimental planet as well, and they've put beings here as well. Now, the beings that were on the planet, some of the previous inhabitants, they actually had the biological capacity to be able to breathe out in the atmosphere. And so the Anunnaki took that information, replicated it with some DNA, and then created humans. Now, the Anunnaki admit that they created humans as a slave race. End of. There's no getting around that. They've said it themselves. But what they didn't realize was that for some reason there was some potential that was on this planet to allow the people that were on this planet to develop in a more conscious way. Now, because of that, they then decided to create a technical container to hold spirits that cycled in and out. Now, I know that a lot of people believe that spirits are all over the universe and that spirit realms are completely multidimensional right across the whole multiverse, yeah? But the issue with that is that if that's true, you should be able to speak to any spirit and they should be able to discuss with you politics, science, social structures of any race that they've actually existed as. Now, when we speak to these spirits through other mediums and you ask them, they go, no, I just remember my existence as a human. Okay. So the reason that spirit realm was existed is because it's a technology that it was created for humans to cycle in and out of. And I know that a lot of people will not believe it and don't want to believe it, and that's okay as well. Okay.
Can I add something there?
Yeah.
The Zetas themselves say that the spirit realm, after it was created, evolved as well. That people evolved, and so did the spirit realm. And so it's not the same spirit realm that the Anunnaki created.
That's
anymore.
correct.